Hey, this is April, and this show, Set Show, discusses cannabis, psychedelics, and altered states of consciousness generally. It's intended for audiences 21 and over. Also, I am not a medical expert. If you are looking to engage with psychedelic substances, please consult your physician before doing so. Welcome to everyone who is joining us. I'm April, and this is our first virtual psychedelic salon. This was born out of our in-person salon in Seattle that started in 2023. This year, we began at Town Hall Seattle, which opened this conversation to so many more people and was very affirming to me that there's a real hunger for more information around psychedelic medicine and the community that comes along with people who are curious about this topic. We are here to talk about Have a Good Trip, which is the most recent book from Eugenia Bone, who is a food and nature writer. She has a bent toward mycology, is how I've been describing your work. I will read you officially more about Eugenia and Renee. Eugenia Bone is an internationally known food and nature writer whose work has appeared in many anthologies, magazines, and newspapers. She's a member of the faculty at the New York Botanical Garden, where she teaches classes on mycology and psychedelic mushrooms. She is the author or co-author of 9 books on food and biology, including the category staple Mycophilia, and most recently Have a Good Trip, Exploring the Magic Mushroom Experience, released in October of last year. She's been nominated for or won a variety of awards, including the James Beard Award. Eugenia is featured in Fantastic Bungie from 2019. And she also has a Substack where she writes about things that she doesn't write in books or magazines, her interests. Renee is here in Seattle, but happens to be in Connecticut at this time. She's an interdisciplinary mycologist and environmental engineer, focusing on applying fungal science to address environmental challenges. As a doctoral researcher at the University of Washington's Winker Lab, she studies ecological mutualisms to treat soil dysbiosis. Previously, as R&D director at Fungi Perfecti, Renee led projects advancing mycology and biomimicry for real-world applications. She is also a frequent speaker, advisor, and educator dedicated to inspiring others about the promise of fungi and environmental. I think we should begin by Eugenia telling us, what was the inspiration? Why did you decide this book right now?
Thanks for having me on. It's nice to see you all. Thanks for joining tonight. This book, I've written quite a few books, and I had wanted to write this book a long time ago. There were various circumstances that made that impossible. Primarily, I've written Mycophilia and an op-ed in the New York Times saying, let's reschedule psilocybin because it has all this potential for therapeutic treatment, and had a great response to it and said, okay, maybe after Mycophilia, after this book, I'm going to do a book on psychedelic mushrooms and the new science coming out of the academic sphere. There were very few drugs in development at that time. I was working on the proposal, and my agent said, guess who was doing a book on psychedelic drugs? Michael Pollan, which is now somebody I wanted to go up against in the market. So I wrote a book about bacteria. Bacteriology is another topic that I share interests with Renee, since soil dysbiosis has a lot to do with what the bacteria are up to. That was great, but then I couldn't write the book that I wanted to write about psychedelic mushrooms. And so many years later, the opportunity came along for me to write this book. Macmillan called me and asked if I had an idea for a book. It occurred to me that a lot had changed since Michael Pollan's book came out. More people were interested, but had less access to the kind of information that might help them good choices. There was also a lot more science to report on. The community had expanded. There was an industry developing. So there was a lot to say. A friend of mine once said, the trick to writing a book is having enough material. And there definitely has become enough material in the last 10 years or so. That's the background of it. I write about primarily biology and cooking. Cooking and biology are very similar in a lot of ways. Certainly same kind of headset, very precise thinking and evocative language. So that's how I got to this book. And it's been really fun and a continuing education talking with people about their questions and experiences in the psychedelic realm.
Before Renee starts asking questions, why mycology for you? How did you find yourself a researcher and an interest in bacteria too?
Yeah, so for me, I've been working in mycology for about a decade and a half, and I'm so excited to see Dr. Reagan Nally on the call too, because she worked with me the entire time I was at Fungi Perfecti in research and development. What really drew me into mycology is I was actually working in research in tribal communities on health and environmental policy, and as I learned more about the role of plants and traditional uses of plants and mushrooms, it really became clear that mushrooms and fungi were such a connecting force in terms of our connection with the natural world. And at the thread and the line that I've been pursuing for my whole life, the diversity of everything you get to experience in mycology is amazing. For an interdisciplinary explorer type, there is so much to dine on here. A lot of people get turned on to mycology from psilocybin. They have psilocybin, they have this experience, and they're like, what is going on with the kingdom? There's really something here. That wasn't my personal entrance point. It was actually like mycology first, and particularly the environmental aspects. Then I fell in love with psilocybin. When research at Fungi Perfecti was kicking up and we were doing intellectual property development around specialized combinations with psilocybin for a startup. This was during the pandemic when we had the shroom boom and fantastic fungi came out. I was really compelled by how this can change our psychology, handle complexity, and increase a sense of connection. Those were some of the very moving parts of psilocybin for me. And why mycology? Mycology is wild and it's so much fun. And Eugenia, you did a great job in the book documenting some of the transfer of community knowledge and the peer-to-peer foraging in the field and talking about bruising and identification features. There is such a social dynamic to how mycology works and how we build knowledge. And then we have more academic and medical research around psilocybin, like this interface of formalized institutional academic science and how they work together. How do academic researchers get ideas for new research, new insights? How does this gift economy of psilocybin mushrooms work with forces of capital? The more that we have psychedelic startups and businesses in ecology, like you always have the most interesting stuff at the edges and where things meet. I think what is happening with psilocybin right now and the exploration of, is this a community thing? Are we going to keep it a community thing and grow mushrooms in our closet and exchange it with people? Or is this really going a medical route? Is it going to be medicalized? We're going to have clinics and do that whole thing. It's really a lightning rod for so many issues in science too. So those are what really moves me about this work. It's like a gateway topic into many other areas. And it's why Eugenia and I started talking and this all came together. Because yes, it's about psilocybin, but it's about so much more in our society.
When it comes to mycology, that's where the Venn diagram called Renee and the Venn diagram called Eugenia really cross over. That's our mutual interest. And for me, it was through foraging. And I was a belly hunter. The amateur mycology world has expanded. When I first got interested, it was segmented. You had the academics, the professional mycologists. You had a robust amateur scene, but it was composed of foragers, taxonomy jocks, and trippers. Basically, that was like, so the foragers were the culinary people and were often called pot hunters in a slightly derogatory way. The taxonomy people were very much connected with academia and would send samples to researchers at universities. The psychedelic scene, I have to say, it was magic mushrooms are the black sheep of the mycology world when I first got interested. I was interested in foraging and eating wild mushrooms and learning how to find them. But then I fell down the hole of mycology, which one way or another, if you're in it happens. People fall down that hole. Lately, a lot of people have been falling down that hole, falling in love with mycology. But yeah, so for me, my observation was the trippers were a lot, even though I knew there was underground kind of community groups, integration groups, neo-shamans that were helping guide people, it still was a very peripheral scene. If you went to a mycology foray, festival, conference of some sort, nobody would speak about magic mushrooms. It's true. It probably would have tanked your career back then to try to get into them. But when some studies started to appear out of Johns Hopkins by legitimate researchers, it slowly moved past just a hippie, druggy realm. And also there was this there was always the churches and the spiritual people who were involved, but it was all underground. The psychedelic aspect that was really the part that's truly evolved as far as its impact socially, from what I've seen. Culinary is moving along. People are getting more and more interested in eating mushrooms, which is very good. A lot of people used to say terrible things about eating mushrooms, like yuck. It was kind of a bit of a hard sell, but I think all that's changing as folks realize there's some nutritional values, they're sustainable food, they are very versatile. We're seeing a real change in the scene happening. I think psychedelics are the most significant in terms of forward momentum research. Industry, functional mushrooms, a big part of that too. And psychedelics, to the extent they're still illegal. So there's not much industry can happen at this point, but certainly functional mushrooms, as anybody who's drinking reishi coffee in the morning can tell you.
Eugenia, as you put all of the experiences and information together from this book, and as you've been talking with different groups and in different places since it launched last year, how do you think industry should develop around this?
Yeah. I can tell you what seems to be working and what is not working so well. If you're going to try to put a drug through the FDA regulatory system, it doesn't help a psychedelic drug to have the psychedelic community dissing the regulatory agency that's trying to secure its safety and efficacy. The community is, I think, putting up some of its own roadblocks when it comes to medicalizing this drug. Legalizing, they're doing a pretty good job. It's even though there's been some failures recently, ballot box, there's also been some successes. We've come a long way. Colorado's legal and Oregon is decrimmed and many municipalities are decrimmed. In that sense, the community, the people who are super interested in it, are moving things forward. In terms of the religious communities, there are quite a few. Surprising, but there are quite a few religious groups, churches that use psychedelics as their sacraments. And I'm not talking about traditional religious groups, which some people know about, but contemporary ones that have emerged in the last 10 years. Those groups, interesting, they're entering and expanding the scene in a sort of sideways maneuver, because the truth that I discerned is that DEA just doesn't really care to bring on a case that they aren't sure they're going to win. And due to the Freedom of Religion Act, if a church is using psilocybin in its ceremonies and they're using it in a responsible way and they're not they're not like a nuisance in the neighborhood and the kids aren't raiding the tabernacle, then it's just not really on law enforcement's radar. If they're not bothering anybody because there's not gangs involved in magic mushroom use and not a lot of guns and stuff, DEA, screw it. We just don't want to know about it unless there's a real problem. And I've heard that from numerous law enforcement officers. And so that's this strange, sideways, adjacent path that the magic mushroom use has accelerated and grown.
Yeah, that squares with what I've experienced too, not only with the DEA, like extremely conservative and doesn't really know what to do with mushrooms in a regulatory framework. There is a lot about mycology here in general, where it's like a square peg in a round hole situation. We don't have many social research frameworks to deal with the complexity of,
I know about mycology. I mean, I was saying remember when we last talked, I went back to school to study biology. And I had one lecture on mycology. It's mind-blowing. So there really isn't the education out there. In fact, in the Netherlands, does the magic truffle, I guess hopefully some of you have heard about magic truffles. That's what you get if you're going to trip on mushrooms or psilocybin in Amsterdam. And the thing is, it's not a mushroom, it's the sclerotia of the fungus. So some species of psilocybin have this resting phase where the mycelium is it's like an enriched mass. And it's not, it's almost like that's what it is. It's like a resting phase of the mycelium. It's very tightly wound. So it looks like a truffle, but it's not a truffle. And the mycelium of psilocybin mushrooms species tend to have less psilocybin in it. Most of it's in the mushroom itself, not so much in the mycelium, but there's some. You can see it. It's blue when it's growing in wood chips and stuff. But there's enough for that sclerotia to get people high. The reason why it's legal is because the government, and the Dutch government, was banning mushrooms, but they just forgot about fungi. They didn't really have that on their radar. And so because the sclerotia is mycelium, it's not illegal. It hasn't been made illegal. So it's this strange kind of a gap in mycological knowledge by the lawmakers, the Dutch lawmakers that have allowed that particular form of the drug to be legal and used.
Yeah. And in that case, it's like the gap was like, okay, from whoever that producer was, their perspective is let's move forward. But if you were a more risk averse company, it'd be like, we have to resolve this, get permission. That's a huge block for research with natural psilocybin, the whole mushroom, which is practically what people are using. There's a paper with some case studies comparing natural, synthetic, and the mushroom extract. They are just case studies that came out a few months ago. That is where like some of the formalized academic knowledge, like it's not quite connecting with on the ground realities around the species as much as
like, what is the difference eating the mushroom and a synthetic psilocybin? Nobody knows for sure, but it could be significant. The whole mushroom has an entourage of psychoactive ingredients. I can name a few of them and what they actually do. Maybe they break down very quickly in the body and do nothing, but maybe they actually affect the trip, affect body load, or maybe it's the ratio between these different psychoactives that creates the nature of a trip you have from one species versus another. That's the argument for consuming the whole mushroom, which is what most people do. And I think the reason why they don't take the synthetic is because it's actually tricky to make. It's not widely available. I only know of one producer who makes synthetic psilocybin. But the synthetic makes a lot of sense if you're microdosing because you can measure a very specific amount.
People like falling in love with ecology. It is such a phenomenon. And you have been, I think, thinking about this, writing this, pursuing this like more than anyone. For people falling in love with mycology now, what do you think is important for them to know?
So I think that for me, there's a lot of ways in. The culinary people go in one way, the foraging people go in another. Yesterday, I was at a friend's house in Larchmont for the holiday, and my husband, who's got the foraging bug, when he just learned that there was some chanterelles growing under one of these trees, he was up and out. My daughter was like, he was supposed to take me. No, man, he was gone. That's how foragers are. They really get into it. And I should know. I'm the same way. The excitement of foraging, the possibility of finding new species, this is huge for amateur mycologists. There's so many ways in that can attract people. If you're asking for my advice, it would be curiosity is destiny. And whatever you follow, if you give yourself to it, that's where you're going to end up. And that's how it was for me. If you allow yourself to indulge your curiosity, you'll go into all kinds of areas of mycology. You might become like this friend of mine, Ethan, who runs the New York Mycological Society right now. He got interested in little bumps and junky things that fungi grow on. They call them asco. If it looks like dog vomit, he's fascinated. And he's become really expert in this. And the more he knows, the mastery gives him confidence and joy, just like it does when we master anything. I think it's just your curiosity. What doorway you open has a lot to do with what paths interest you the most. For me, cooking, foraging. But then I got just interested in pure mycology and understanding how they live. And most particularly, and this is where we also, part of this is also our vendor, Renee, is I got very interested in what I could understand about ecology and the models fungi turned out to be a great model for learning ecology that I was then able to expand or apply to other aspects of ecology, like bacteriology, like microbiology, the gut microbiome, and ecology in the wilderness in Colorado, a valley, what animals and plants and other critters are alive in there. It opened the door to systems thinking about nature, which changed everything, because then I didn't have to be right or wrong. I was able to hold in my mind many things at once. No more binary thinking. It's really like a revelation. So I think that's where, no matter how you get in, maybe that's where it can lead.
It's bringing us out of like mechanistic thinking, because mycology, there's a few things about it that like they're an awakening to complexity, nuance, and ambiguity. This totally comes into play with psilocybin, navigating products, the whole natural product space, scientific literacy, dealing with claims. You have companies putting things out, leaning on knowledge, skill, and development. I dealt with this all the time at Fungi. Reagan, you've been there too. This was a big part of our work. And so the rapid development of knowledge and dealing with that and educating and communicating about that. Welcome to complexity. The fungal kingdom, there's an exception to every rule, even with psilocybin containing mushrooms. We think about psilocybe cubensis, like psilocybe is the genus name, it's the group of mushrooms, but not all of them produce psilocybin in that group, but there's some outside in other areas that produce psilocybin. So you're always dealing with very few neat rules in mycology. So
color in the lines.
Yeah, totally. Even the blue bruising thing, your work and reading the book, it is just really a masterful way of navigating these things. It's a big challenge and intimidating to people for all of the neurobiological and psychiatric benefits of psilocybin, other psychedelics. I actually think learning about fungi is really good for our brains because of this gateway into ecological thinking and awakening to complexity and the true reality. And honestly, we would be in a very different place socially. I do hope we have time to talk about cultural impacts of this work, because that's also just really inspiring to me. Can this help us on a macro social level? My goodness.
My research suggests maybe not. Sorry to be Debbie Downer, but
Yep.
This drug amplifies. It doesn't course correct. It amplifies. So if you're an asshole, it's not going to make you. This was this kind of fantasy in a way of the MAPS folks, and even before them, the idealists of the 60s who thought if we just dose Richard Nixon, he'll stop being such an asshole and he'll understand that we don't want to fight in the Vietnam War and so on. And have the whatever you're against, whoever you're against, that they will see the light if they take psychedelics. No, it tends to amplify. Somebody who took a lot of psychedelics was that guy that attacked the Capitol in a kind of Davy Crockett hat with the horns and the sort of Speedo, like fur Speedo. I don't know if you remember him, the MAGA shaman.
Shaman. Yeah. He's a psychedelic guy.
Or it's sentient. It amplifies. That's the thing. It doesn't necessarily change who you are. It can help it. I guess what some folks say is beneficial is that it can help them see who they are. If you feel lost in terms of what do I really think about this, or what, I'm at a fork in the road. I know inside me which way to go, but I can't hear myself for some reason. So it can amplify things that doesn't, which is great. But that same ability to amplify things that are present has a dark side. Not only can it amplify asshole-ish here and thinking, and it can also, there's a dark side to it where it can amplify negative feelings about yourself. People who have had trips will say they encounter entities that say you are a bad person and you should kill yourself. And one of the things I did in this book, which is not a guide, I would be an asshole if I was trying to guide anybody, in my view. But it's a resource to show folks this in a more complex way, using the language of journalism and the values and a critical eye of the journalist to describe how people are using the drug today and what they have to say about it. And the science writing, I think that you, Renee, are skilled, right, in science communication. I know that there's courses that you can graduate in as a science communicator now in colleges. This book, Have a Good Trip, is really science communication. It's not a loving guide. There's other people who do that. Power to them, but that's not what I do at all.
Yeah, totally agree. When Fantastic Fungi came out and there was that upwelling of everything around psychedelics and all the research and development, it was super exciting. I was very idealistic about it. Some of the work that MAPS was doing and billionaires getting into psychedelics, I was excited about the prospect for deep and comprehensive social change and how to change your mind, I think encompasses some of that thinking. But yeah, it does amplify individual experience. When I started hearing about some of the chat GPT AI induced psychosis, it is a little bit similar where you're really just tripping out on your own story. And real healing and integration that comes from social structures, community-based discernment, accountability, like to be less of an asshole. And that's not, it's okay, surprise, we're here in 2025. There doesn't seem to be a magic pill or a magic remedy for some of these things.
Folks who eat magic mushrooms will then, after they're a part of integration groups of various sorts, and they're all over the country. I was amazed at how many integration groups there are. These integration groups may be organized based on geography, like the Baltimore Psychedelic Integration Group or the Boston Psychedelic Integration Group, or they might be organized around gender or a racial identity. They might be organized around a diagnosis, like there's an autistic psychedelic group. Autistic people who take psychedelics will integrate and discuss their experiences and how it affected them. The cluster headache people are one of the most famous. They're not integration groups, but they're a chat group that led the science by sharing their anecdotal experiences. Clusterbusters.com was a wonderful website. Somebody wrote a whole book about it. It's a very rich topic, but the Cluster Busters was this online chat group for people who suffer from those terrible migraines. Cluster headaches are awful. They're intense. They happen in patterns, and there's no real cure for them, like migraines. And so those folks were writing on the boards of the clusterbusters.com website, what helped them, what worked for them. And so more and more people started writing about psilocybin and how it aborted their headaches or stopped the syndromes. They'd have a headache, but then not another. And researchers read it and they were like, let's design a study and see what's going on if we can. And so then that leads to more academic studies, which I'm going to do a little detour here, Renee. I think it's helpful. I hope everyone knows there's a difference between academic studies and industry studies, right? So the kind of studies made famous in Michael Pollan's book, and that really have inspired so many people, that show all this great promise for all kinds of stuff like psychedelics and addiction, tobacco, cocaine, psychedelics and anorexia nervosa, psychedelics and PTSD of all different sorts. There's a lot of studies, but these are not the same kind that go through the FDA regulatory system. Those are studies that are being done by a company that has a product they want to take to market. And in order to sell a drug in the USA, you have to prove efficacy and safety. And there are a lot of hoops to go through to achieve that. I just finished my FDA essay for my next Substack and going to get I'm working with Joyce to review it. I didn't know that the FDA regulatory system is a very distinct. We tend to merge in our minds the academic studies and the industry studies, but they're not the same thing. They have different requirements, different definitions. It's important to understand that, because if folks say, well, Johns Hopkins study says there's 12 people, 65% of them felt better from their depression. What's the problem, FDA? FDA is like, where's the drug? What's the drug that you want to market? They're a consumer advocacy group at the end of the day. That's what they do. They're like consumer advocacy, making sure that somebody doesn't sell you something or sell your doctor something that could cause tumors, birth defects, or suicide ideation. Hopefully. Or even if it does, they want to be able to put it on the label, may cause suicidal ideation.
Eugenia, I know, April, I am aware of time. I think we could talk for a very long time about many things. Back to the Renee Eugenia diagram. In terms of people and their sense of connection with one another in the natural world? Do you think psilocybin, with all of your research that you've seen, and the communities connected with, the people you talk to, what do you think of that? Does psilocybin improve our relationship with the natural world, do you think?
I think what psilocybin can do is enhance a personal relationship with the natural world. One of the things that happens is that when folks are tripping, they see stuff like fractals, where the clouds, for example, will break down into these geometric patterns, which gives folks this feeling that there's an underlying order to everything in nature. Seeing that, passing through this film into a greater understanding of the universe, is very satisfying. Most people do not take psilocybin for those reasons. Most people take them to have a mind expansion, a silly time, beautiful time, bunch of kids not kids. They're all adults. I'm in the senior group now, but all these young adults were taking psychedelic mushrooms over the weekend to play charades, crack up, and wander around at night watching the fireflies. That's how most people use the drug, for personal joy and enhancement. Sometimes it can go very wrong if your set and setting is not conducive. Like, I met this girl on the bus to Burning Man, and I said, "Are you going to do mushrooms in Burning Man?" And she said, "Hell no. Last year I did mushrooms and I spent the whole time crying in my tent, thinking about her family dynamics and all that stuff. It's a very emotional experience." She said, "This time I'm doing it." But by and large, people take them at music festivals, things like that. It's these therapeutic uses that are getting the attention from industry and academia, not so much from regular people, although I have interviewed easily 100 people take them regularly for therapeutic purposes, either as microdoses or periodic low doses, or the occasional annual or biannual big dose where they do some deep thinking about themselves and the people they love. But yeah, most people are doing it when they go to the rave, walking in the woods, or just for entertainment value. It's an enhancement drug, ultimately. It's not a real hallucination like in a psychotic thing where you might think somebody's in your room. It's not like you're going to mistake your dog for a paper bag, or the opposite. It's more enhancement of vision, hearing, feeling, touching, smelling, and so on. Emotional stuff, all enhancement. That's it seems to be its primary function for most people, whether you use it therapeutically or not.
You use the word amplifier. I think that applies, right?
Exactly. They're adjacent interpretations for sure.
We're going to go into Q&A, but I did want to say something that when you were setting up the conversation, Renee, like, why now? Why is this book important now? Since 2019, we've gone from less than 400,000 people that live in decrim cities, counties, states to 27 million today. So that's a lot that's changed in just the last 6 months in terms of people's access. And yeah, I think the timing of your book is perfect. In writing, I have called it a guide because I think resource is a more appropriate word because it covers everything. Like your mushroom math of how you figured out and how much of a microdose you were actually taking based on the numbers.
I was like so bored doing all the math and stuff. But at the end of the day, it's just a tool. Right? A guide, your shaman, or your priest, or your rabbi, those are the people that help you deal with stuff. This book doesn't do that, but it answers all the questions you might have about psychedelic mushrooms. Mycology, why do they bruise blue? What different ways people eat them? What is lemon tea? It goes on and on. And pulling all that information together, I felt it was timely because I know people are more people are doing, the newspapers are saying as much. More people are taking this drug. Look, I was walking behind these two really cute girls in Soho, and one of them was saying to the other, and this was right before my book came out, and one of them said to the other, "Yeah, I'm microdosing right now." And the other girl goes, "Oh, really? What are microdoses? Is it a plant?" And the first girl goes, "I don't really know, but I get them on the internet. I got to get this book to these girls before they do some harm to their bodies." This book is for your auntie who's thinking about microdosing because she's been suffering from depression or low-grade depression all her life, and she's thinking maybe it'll help. Or for your friend who is PTSD or his family who is worried about him. What are the circumstances? Why did vets use them? How do they use them? How do you get into a clinical trial? When you have a lot of people taking this drug or interested in taking it, it would help them make good choices. It's also kind of critical of the industry and anybody who's trying to make money and who's trying to encourage you to do something but has a financial reason to do.
Yeah.
Not that we all have to make money. I'm selling a book, but those red flags are important, and it's not impossible to learn about critical thinking. And as Renee pointed out earlier, to be able to analyze a claim, like when somebody says, oh, psilocybin cures Lyme disease, but to be able to say, okay, how do they prove that? How do I know that's really true before I spend thousands of dollars to go on retreat in Jamaica? So that's what the book does. It's a resource, because I would never say, April, this is what I think you should do.
Yeah. I sent out a newsletter this weekend and I quoted from the book because I thought what you said about when you're vulnerable, your ability, your judgment is compromised. And you brought up the example of face cream to make us look younger. Okay, I know they're bullshitting me, but fine, whatever. It's $50, it's $100.
I'm vulnerable right now, so I'm susceptible to being sold something.
And then you went on to talk about the price changes of a particular platform. It used to cost $100. Now it costs $1,000. I really struggle with that as a person working in this space as a creative, as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Because I can't look at Set as an enterprise to feed my family because of the stress and the pressure I have to put on it, which kills the spirit of why I'm here. I really struggle with that.
You're threading a needle in a way with this, but there's plenty of things that do have good evidence. Learning how to read the science and to find where there might be opportunities to build a business is out there. People just need to learn how to do the science, which I try to do. I even explain how to read scientific paper and these things. Trying to give everybody as much artillery as to arm them as best they can, because in a way, now that we have an industry, we've got consumers. When we have consumers in an industry, the question is, how do they protect themselves? Are they protected? We don't have a regulatory system that's involved in. There's shamans and neo-shamans. They're not regulated in any way. You just have to trust your instinct and look at various red flags to determine who you want to leave your mind, in whose hands you want to leave your mind. I consider this book in a small way to be, what would Ralph Nader say? Many of you remember Ralph Nader. One of the reasons why we have seatbelts, using scientific communication and journalistic integrity, like those ethics. That's what the book is built from.
So I'm waiting for questions in the Q&A. You can also raise your hand and ask in person. We can see your face if you have a question. I'm going to change the view so I can see everyone here. Is there anyone that would like to ask a question?
If no, we can just keep going, and then when something pops up, we can address.
Yeah. There's only one church that the DEA has granted approval to use.
But I won a court case.
So although there are over 200 psychedelic churches that are registered, there's just one. That was an interesting.
And that's ayahuasca, right?
Eagle and the Condor, right? Is that ayahuasca or San Pedro?
I think it's the peyote. Because that's what the Religious Freedom Act is about. Religious Freedom Restoration Act, is that right? Anyway, I wrote a chapter about it in the book.
Yeah, it's the last chapter.
That really set a precedent. Now, that precedent hasn't been challenged in court, but these churches that have erupted all over the country are essentially challenging, saying, go ahead, sue me, because I have a precedent that makes it look really good for me, as long as I'm not a public nuisance. At the same time, there's some courts who will say, look, this is what you need for a religion. You need holidays. You need a book, like a Bible kind of thing. Different courts might address it in different ways. To date, I'm not aware. I only know of one church that got shut down, and they really were a front for selling drugs, frankly. I was a member, so I know.
We have a question.
Favorite.
Thank you, Anne. Do you have a favorite mutualism between fungi and plants?
And I think we should throw that question at Renee because mutualism is her wheelhouse. Let's say something about the pronunciation.
Root.
I got an email from somebody who said, the way you pronounce fungi in Fantastic Fungi, the movie, is so offensive. You should be raped and beheaded.
Oh,
It's like,
wow.
I was really thrown off by that. I had never received anything quite so aggressive. People have said, you're a jerk, or I hate what you think and say, but this was like assaultive. So I wrote a few of my colleagues about it, including Renee's friend Paul Stamets. And I said, has this happened to you? And what do you think? Paul was the most helpful. He says fungi as well. And he says, I say fungi because that's the way my teacher said it. And so that's what I use. That's true of me. My teachers were Gary Linkoff and Tom Volk, both deceased now, but they said fungi. So I said fungi, but it's not incorrect or correct. You can say you can say fungi, 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 fungi. It's all okay. And anyone who tells you you're wrong is wrong. Frankly, be comfortable with your pronunciation because nobody owns that one. Okay, I'm throwing it over to Renee. Let's talk about
Yeah. We're not gatekeepers, we're gate openers here. And at Fungi Perfecti, we would say with the Latin name, just say with confidence. Honestly, relax about the whole thing. But yeah, Eugenia, nuts for mutualism. I think I want to make a t-shirt or a bumper sticker about that. So thank you. Psilocybin producing mushrooms, they're not known to engage in mutualism with plants directly, but there are some like habitat overlap and
Can you define mutualism?
yeah, so mutualism in ecology is like a win-win when there's some kind of relationship or nutrient transfer or being in the same space where both organisms involved are benefiting. So yes, that's for mutualism, and I want mutualism everywhere and for us to have very smart design about everything we do. Really think that we can learn a lot from these systems that can inform how we engage economically, socially. So anyway, psilocybin mushrooms, they're not known to engage in direct mutualisms. I am nuts for a group of plants called mycoheterotrophs, and they get their nutrients from mycorrhizal fungi. These are fungi in the soil. And then mycorrhizal fungi generally have a very long history of association with plant roots. And these can be found in forest settings, in agriculture, and mycorrhizal fungi are a huge reason that we have plants on our planet. It's a 400 million year old association, and it's my favorite example of mutualism, and it's applicable to so many things. And ecological restoration, regenerative agriculture. So you can go nuts on it.
Sorry about that. I think my favorite one are the endophytes. I love them. They're so mysterious. For those of you who are not hip to endophytes, between the cells of all plants, every plant, live fungi. And those fungi, just as the mycorrhizal fungi trade nutrients that it forages in the soil with the plant for photosynthase that the plant makes as a result of photosynthesis, what endophytes do is like the plant has shopped out its immune system. The endophyte tickles the immune system of the plant and keeps it primed for when real trouble comes along. These are just some of the roles that have been discovered because it's a pretty new thing. I have t-shirts that are older than a lot of knowledge about endophytes, but they also provide defense services. So and this is probably as ancient a relationship with plants, the endophytic fungi living between its cells, as the mycorrhizal fungi living on the roots of the plants. The endophyte provides tolerance to extreme conditions. So when plants migrated out of the cool, wet environment of oceans and onto the significantly hotter and drier environment of the terra firma, the endophytes helped that transition by providing a kind of tolerance service to the plant so that it didn't produce oxidants that are harmful to the plant cells. It's like they produce antioxidants, right, that help the plant survive the day. And those endophytes are being studied by various people and has a really interesting potential market. It's being used to a degree, but I think it can go a lot further to use endophytes to help agricultural plants survive an increasingly dry or hot planet, right? Because the endophytes help the plant tolerate these adverse conditions. Rice plants with souped up endophytes might be able to better survive climate change. So the potential for our food supply is just amazing. It'll be interesting to see what happens with that.
Can you share any resources that use mycology as a model to explore ecology?
Sure. That's a great question. My first impulse is we need way more of this and way more people working on it. I think it's a really exciting front of mycology right now. Two things. I think Merlin Sheldrake's Entangled Life does a really good job describing mycology with an ecological focus. Also, there's a book called Let's Become Fungal. This profiles different art and science projects from mycology using a lot of art and activism, profiling activism groups that showcases all of the different applications in a really creative way.
That's a great place to look to read that sort of popular science kind of book for it. I'm trying to think if there are any courses. The biology course that I took was actually an ecology program at Columbia, and it had one lecture on ecology. Here's another question. This one's for me. Okay, I talked about what has been most surprising response you've received to have a good trip. By and large, the few things. One response that has continued to surprise me is after I do talks all over, there has been a lot of interest, even all these months after publication. How many people come up to me afterwards, usually one or two per talk, and want to talk about derealization, that they suffered derealization as a result of a trip, which falls into the category of adverse effects from a psychedelic. Derealization is when the world doesn't seem real to you. It's like you're in a dream. It's very scary. People have told me that they've gone to their psychiatrists or therapists afterwards and said, I feel like nothing is real and there's something wrong with my mind. And the therapist who's not trained will say, yeah, you broke your mind. It's not helpful at all. I knew that bad trips were common based on being in the scene for so many years. I didn't realize that 30% of people probably have bad trips. And the problem is that the psychedelic community tends to negate those experiences. They'll say things like, there's no such thing as a bad trip. There's only challenging trips. Or you might not get the trip you want, but you'll get the trip you need, which in my view is just utter bullshit. Because if you've experienced derealization 4 months after a trip, that's not your fault. It's because you had a very traumatic experience, not unlike having a nervous breakdown, and you've got a lot to go through to get yourself back together. So that kind of underlying denialism of the dark side of psychedelic mushrooms was deeply disappointing to me. I think folks are doing it because they felt that it would undermine the forward momentum of legalization to say anything bad. If anything bad was reported about psychedelic mushrooms, it would tank the legalization effort the way LSD was tanked in the 60s, because there was a lot of research going on then as well. So those were definitely factors. The whole bad trip thing was a big surprise to me. It wasn't until I started to synthesize large numbers of trip reports, because that was one aspect of my research. I had numerous research approaches, and one was to synthesize large numbers of trip reports. One was the stereotypes that tend to evolve for psychedelic trips. There was various things that happen over and over again that people reported, and it was interesting how consistent or how many nightmares we actually share, which in itself is an area of great curiosity to me and something that I reported on at length. Probably the only person to really report on bad trips at length at this point. I don't know. I hope more and more people are. To not report on bad trips is a mistake. It's bad for the movement, for the industry, for the individual, for everything.
as cannabis has commercialized and there are more reported cases of cannabis use disorder, you just can't talk about it because the industry doesn't want to talk about the fact that maybe we got this wrong or maybe THC levels are too high. And that's part of it. Because humans are complex.
If you're going to go into this field to ignore the totality of the experience, that's the path to self-destruction, as far as I'm concerned. And also, if you're trying to get public opinion on your side and folks don't want to admit that there's the dark side to it, eventually you're going to be outed. And then they're going to be really pissed. Public's going to be really pissed when all of a sudden you say, I know we said it was safe as milk, but no, actually.
Not only are humans complex and the human mind is complex, but humans are human. And they do bad things, as we know, with facilitators taking advantage of power trips and that sort of thing. So it's going to continue to be a complicated topic as more and more people have access and feel they have permission to try this. There's so much we don't know about human bodies and diversity.
Yes, Anne.
Yes, and exactly. Those of you who are still on the call and listening, the microdosing portion of this book, I found to be so thorough and exactly what you need. Other resources that I've investigated, or like all the notes that I keep in my little note keeper on my phone, it's all in one place. It doesn't say a resource for microdosing, but it really is a great resource for anyone who's curious about microdosing, Eugenia. And that was so needed in the market.
I told you about those two girls. There's people who talk about microdosing all kinds of stuff right now, which is just, to me, I don't get it. Like, why would you microdose? I know, Renee, we have a little crossover in these fields, but I don't understand why you would microdose something you can eat that doesn't cause intoxication. Why microdose lion's mane when you can microdose celery or blueberries or anything that's good for you? What's the point? You microdose a psychedelic or another drug that activates serotonin receptors. You microdose that kind of drug because you don't want to be intoxicated. You want to be able to pick up the kids and help with homework, go to the gym, do chores or whatever, go to work. But you're not going to get intoxicated from lion's mane. In fact, you can eat a very big plate of them and it'll probably do as much or more good for you as any extract, which separates you from your wallet, but won't hurt you. Understanding what microdosing is and what its point is just the first step. And then how do you dose yourself, and understanding the role of cultivars and how important that is, and being able to measure psilocybin so that you can control. I think it'll be wonderful where it's legal, folks are able to get synthetic psilocybin, because it'll solve a lot of problems. And you don't have to worry about the entourage effects so much because you're not tripping. Just declare those serotonin receptors, because based on my own experience, I found time collapsed, which is a very typical experience when you're tripping on a big dose. 2 hours later, you feel like it's many hours later and it's only 45 minutes. The microdosing seems to do the same thing for me and for many people I spoke with. That would suggest serotonin receptors are being affected, but on an extremely light dose without having visuals or other kinds of intoxication effects.
Yeah, I thought that your personal report of how you realize you hold so much tension when you're writing, and that the microdosing helped with that. Thank you. That is true for me. I do the same thing, and I will pay attention now when I microdose if my body relaxes while I'm working, because I'm causing myself some serious problems by being so intense at the computer.
Thing when you in a trip and this happened to me, but it's not uncommon with others, that if you have chronic neck pain or something like that during the trip, it'll recede. There are studies going on chronic pain and psychedelics. There's a potential in the area of back pain more than anything else. If you have a mechanical problem, it's not quite the same. If you have more of a chronic pain, potentially, and definitely phantom limb pain is an interesting avenue for psychedelic therapy.
We're going to wrap up now. So, Renee, is there anything you're working on that you would like to make sure that we all know about or are paying attention to?
Yeah, so I'm currently working on fungi and microbes together for soil health and fertility and treating microbial imbalances, particularly in a project called BioBead, which is becoming a startup that we're really excited about, informed by structures and mutualisms. I think Anne asked, what are some ways that we're broadening the connections with mycology? I'm trying to do that structurally and with systems, as well as specific tech inspired by fungi. I love psilocybin, watch it closely. I think this is all fascinating work and connected. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your thoughtful questions. Eugenia, anything? Are you going to be speaking somewhere? Can we buy tickets to watch you live?
I'll be at the Telluride Mushroom Festival. I'm doing a talk on the FDA and psychedelics. I'm doing a talk on how to spot red flags and break down claims in the psychedelic industry. And then I come back. That's a Telluride in August. And then I come back and I'm going to the North American Mycological Association foray in September. I'll be talking about doing that Ralph Nader thing again. And then I'll be doing a talk on seniors and psychedelics, as well as some cooking demo stuff, mushroom cooking stuff. And then in October, I'll be in Seattle. I'll be in Seattle at the Olympia foray. And I'm not positive what I'm going to be doing there, but I'll be there for a couple of days. That's what's coming up immediately. And if anybody's interested in what I'm up to, I have a free Substack. I suggest you check in on it. After I put up this FDA story, I'm going to start floating some essays derived from a new idea. My book. We'll see how it reads.
Our next salon on August 4th is about psychedelics for seniors with Charlie Wininger, who is in your neck of the woods. He's in Brooklyn, his book on MDMA. So
We're up.
Yes, thank you very much both for your time and thoughtfulness. I look forward to sharing this conversation with more people.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
For having
Really
me.
appreciate it.
Great speaking with you, Renee. Thanks, everyone.
True pleasure. Take care.
Okay.
Thanks, April.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for today's show. I'm April, and I'll be back the next installment of Set Set, where we cover everything you need to have a safe, supported psychedelic experience in the wild.